Okay, well, it's a pleasure to have with us here Patrick Huff,
Sure.
who we're going to have a conversation that's gonna be centered around his contribution, his very thoughtful contribution to the important book, "Building Free Life: Dialogues with Ocalan," which has come out recently. I also have a piece in that book, and so. I think as I say, it's a important book, and it's good to uh, generate conversation about how it is a variety of different intellectuals and activists are engaging with the political thought of Abdullah Öcalan, his rearticulation of self-determination as radical democracy, his project of democratic confederalism. And I think Patrick has a very uh, well framed analysis and engagement with that.
Thank you.
And so I just wanted to talk to Patrick about his contribution to the book. But to begin with, I guess, if you could tell us a little bit about how it is that you became interested in the Kurdish movement and you became familiar with the ideas of Abdullah Öcalan.
Yeah. Um, well, it's interesting. I mean, I think I had a awareness of the Kurdish struggle. At least for I don't know, going back maybe into the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s, when I first became aware of it. But that was kind of surface level. It was pretty distant from really any deep understanding of it. I just kind of knew that there were these people in Turkey and various other places that were basically struggling for some sort of independence or something like that. But I really didn't pay an incredible amount of attention to it initially because you know it kind of filtered through at that time, kind of filtered through the U.S. media and even parts of, I think, the left in the U.S. There was this kind of impression of the Kurdish movement as basically being kind of dead ender, Marxist Leninist, something like that. And that really wasn't my politic. It wasn't really something I was particularly interested in per se.
Mm,
I mean, I tend to hew more closer to libertarian socialism, anarchism, and things
mm,
like that. So it wasn't really exciting to me. I mean, I kind of agreed with the idea that they should have, independence or whatnot. But anyway, so that was, probably in the mid 2000s when I first became aware of the movement itself. But really, it wasn't until I would say the siege of Kobani, maybe a bit before that,
mm,
that I really started paying attention to it. And then I started reading a little bit more about it. I started kind of paying attention to what the ideology was, what the theory was, and then just the incredible heroic defense of Kobani, the operation to kind of open up the corridor around Sinjar to help Yazidis against ISIS and so on. I mean, that, I think for a lot of people around the world kind of captured our hearts and imaginations in a way that, movements anywhere really hadn't, maybe since the Zapatistas.
mm, mm,
And I think, so that's when I really got interested. And then, we moved here to Britain from the United States. And one day we were out just kind of walking around the town in Brighton where I live, and we saw a Kurdish demonstration.
mm,
We saw a demo out in front of this kind of shopping center,
mm,
and I was like, oh, yeah, look at that, because
mm,
I didn't realize there was a Kurdish community here in Brighton, so I was like, oh, okay, that's cool, right? So from there, we kind of just started looking around, got on the internet, did some searching to kind of look and see what was happening, and there turned out there was a small solidarity group that had relatively recently began in Brighton, and we went to a meeting and just kind of got involved from there. And since then, we've been involved. I say we, myself and my partner, have been involved, probably for the last 5 years or so, I guess, 6 years, 5 years.
Right on, right on.
And that's kind of where, and then, you kind of get into the activism side of it and so on. And, you start to engage the Ocalan's writings and the writings of other, Kurdish thinkers and activists and so on. And, right now, I think it's on a lot of people's minds, David Graeber, who just passed.
Yeah.
I think his writings on it also, really inspired me to look deeper at the situation. So, I think that was kind of the combination of things that kind of brought me to an interest in it. Yeah.
Right on. Yeah. So Graeber played a role in that. Yeah, I think he did play a really important role in raising consciousness amongst a libertarian, socialist, anarchist kind of left in the Anglophone world about putting it on the map, as well as the events that you mentioned. So it's interesting. And so, what are the ideas in Ocalan's thought that stand out to you?
I think. As I kind of say, I think in the chapter in the book, there are a lot of ideas in Ocalan's thought, right? The man is genius, without a doubt on a number of levels. But I think the thing that initially drew me to Ocalan is his attempt to reconceptualize or kind of reevaluate not just kind of his former interest in Marxism or Marxist-Leninism or something like that, but really modernity itself. I think that's really something I found valuable. I think, and then not only just kind of reevaluating that, modernity itself, but also proposing a solution or attempting to propose a solution. And I think that's really, to me, the key thing that I continually kind of fascinated by is the way in which he tries to, offer some pathway forward. I think maybe like, a lot of people who have been involved in kind of left-wing thinking, left-wing politics for a long time, you reach a point, you read Capital, you read the Grundrisa, you read David Harvey, you read Bakunin, you read Kropotkin, and all this, and that's all, fine and good. But at some point, what are we going to do now? Right. In the 21st century, what is the path forward? And I think that people can criticize Ocalan, people can question, the entirety of his suggestions or whatever, but, he's making the effort. And I think that's the thing that I want to engage with is, what is this effort that he's trying to make the move forward? So I think that's a large part of why I'm interested. Also, right now I'm kind of working on another piece I'm kind of in the middle of, and I'm really increasingly fascinated by Ocalan's attempt to speak and develop a kind of mythic language. I think that is also, it's fascinating to me, and really worthwhile. And what I'm kind of looking at some authors.
Marie Midgley, Marie Midgley.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Midgley. Yeah, her. But since then, since I wrote that chapter, I've also been looking at Latin American thinkers. And some of these folk.
Who are you looking at?
Right now, Enrique Dussel.
Dussel is exactly who he's got a lot to say on this whole issue of myth. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I think Dussel, Walter Mignolo.
The decolonial thinkers.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, again, I don't have it fully worked out, but I think this idea that Ocalan's kind of approaching, he talks about, he talks about, meaning, right? He wants to, I mean, I think at the core, and I say this in the chapter, kind of the core of what he's doing intellectually is this kind of quest for, how do we live a meaningful life? How do we, how does society find meaning, essentially? And, that attracts him, I think, to myth, right? To mythology, to what he calls the mythological method, and so on. But I think, what does it mean if we take that position, that he has there, meaning, looking at mythology, and what does that mean, if we take that very seriously and then look at what he's doing when he's reading history, when he's kind of working through, whatever, Bronze Age, the Middle East, or whatever, how is that question of myth and meaning kind of playing into, not just his intellect, but also his style.
The movement, but also the movement, how it's,
well, of course, yes,
linked into this, it's thinking that has a purpose for a movement which is engaged in a life and death struggle for freedom.
Yes,
so,
yes, exactly, yes. And I mean, interesting there, I mean, you can read any number of kind of statements by, by the YPJ or YPG even, where they in these very militant political statements will reference ancient gods. They'll mention like Tiamat or or so on, right? And again, that's something that I mean, you could look again at some of the movements in Latin America, like the Zapatistas. They also kind of play with this kind of mythological, folkloric language. But that's really fascinating with me. And that's kind of something I'm working on now. It's kind of trying to delve a little bit deeper.
That's great. I mean, I think an engagement that puts Ocalan into dialogue with the decolonial thinkers in the Latin American context is very important, both with respect to Dussels' understanding of myth and also his understanding of dialectics, which I think that Ocalan is a dialectical thinker. But also then Mignolo's concept of the colonial matrix of power. I really think that this colonial matrix of power is something that, hold on here, Estella's trying to come in here. This a colonial matrix of power is something that is a framework that has a lot of affinity with the way in which Ocalan talks about modernity, and particularly talking about this kind of twofold this capitalist modernity on the one hand and democratic modernity on the other hand, on this struggle. So I really think that there is something that can very fruitfully be put into dialogue, and it also is something that can help in a way engage with Ocalan in a decolonizing way as well. So that we don't just put Ocalan into dialogue with the Western thinkers, but think about the way in which what Ocalan is doing very much gels with or has strong affinities with what other thinkers on the left thinking about the question of decolonization in the 21st century have to say. And I think you're right as well. There's this particular affinity between the rearticulation of self-determination that Ocalan has and the Kurdish movement espouses and the Zapatista movement.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting in a way. Kind of what I just described that I'm kind of working through right now is I almost see that as a follow-up, unofficial, sequel in a way to the chapter in the book, because the chapter in the book, I'm focused on kind of that dialogue between Ocalan and these various kind of Western thinkers that he cites and relies upon to a certain extent. And so in a way, what I'm doing now is kind of saying, yes, okay, that's important. We need to look at that, but also there's this other side of it that also, we have to bring in, which is what, as you said, that decolonial angle. And the ways in which other movements like the Zapatistas and others have kind of also articulated things, viewpoints, perspectives that are congruent with the Kurdish movement and Ocalan. So yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the points that I make in my article which I think is important, is that we have to think about Ocalan. So we go back to this kind of myth story. Part of this kind of this attempt to provide myths about the origins of inequality and the way in which inequality emerges, trying to think about the axes of inequality or the dimensions of inequality. So think systematically at the same time that he's thinking in terms of providing counter myths.
Sure.
I think that's a really important kind of move that he makes. So orienting towards the past in order to ground a project for the future. I think that's a really important move. However,
Sure.
I think there is a sense in which the material that he relies upon, and we have to think about the material conditions in which
Yeah,
he's operating, is
absolutely.
in this almost total isolation,
Right.
and he's getting his hands on whatever books he can get his hands on, but he ends up relying upon a literature that is in some respects Eurocentric literature, you know.
That's
Are you?
well, it's interesting. I mean, on the one hand, I guess one of the things that kind of fascinates me, and I want to explore this, but I'm not even close to beginning this, right? Which is, I mentioned in the chapter in the book, and I'm sure you're familiar that
Yeah.
Ocalan mentions Nietzsche
Yeah.
several times in
Yeah.
his
Oh yeah.
text,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
And on the one hand, it's like, okay, I get that. I mean, Nietzsche had this very strong affirmation of life. This philosophy saying, this kind of overcoming
Yeah.
approach and so on. But then, Nietzsche wasn't necessarily the
Had some
greatest fan
messed
of
up
women.
politics, man. He had some
Right.
messed up politics.
Right. So one of the things maybe further down the line that I'm interested in is kind of picking up that thread and
Yeah.
saying, well, what is the deeper kind of, again, I very surface level kind of mentioned it in the book, but what is the deeper kind of surface level of Ocalan's engagement with Nietzsche and his interest in Nietzsche?
I think that's a really interesting issue. I think he comes to Nietzsche through Foucault. I think he
Yeah,
comes to
I think
Nietzsche
that's
through
fair.
Foucault. But for me, I mean, I think there's an issue with respect to like the role that Gordon Childe plays.
Yeah, sure.
And this kind of this kind of what I call a Fertile Crescent centric vision of the origins, this origin story, which is
Sure.
associated in a way with the obliteration of the African past. So that Egypt gets
Right.
the African status of Egypt gets questioned and
Right.
also gets demoted in the story.
Of course.
So there is something going on there that when you end up building on some of these things, which again I don't want to blame Ocalan for because Ocalan is doing things that are incredible given the conditions in which he's writing and his intention and his motive in sort of reconstructing that deep history, I think, is very noble. But I think that there is one way to take him seriously is precisely to engage in a critical dialogue with him with respect to like what the limits of the text that he's building upon are.
Sure. Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, part of the reason, one of the reasons why I'm interested in that issue of kind of meaningfulness of myth and so on is, I think there's different ways to kind of read and interpret and engage with Ocalan. So I think there's one way, and I, kind of starting out reading him, early on, I kind of took this initial way, which was, okay, he's making an empirical statement, and he's making his empirical statement about the ancient past, right? Yeah. I think he is. I mean, I think to some extent that's true. But on another level, I think, and the way I'm trying to read him now more is, these things, these aspects of history, according to the sources that he had, happened in this particular way or whatever. But, the question isn't that per se. The question is, what is the meaningful conclusion or perspective we can draw from that, Now, and that's kind of where how I'm trying to approach him now, which is much more, I agree. I mean, I think as you're saying, I think some of these texts like Gordon Childe, even Rodell to some extent, have their limitations, right? But again, for me, the question might be, what is the meaningful perspective he's trying to take from this, and then apply that to the real issue I think that he's concerned about, which is liberation, which is freedom, which is meaningful life, and that sort of thing. So, so again, with Nietzsche, that's, the question to me is like, is he reading Nietzsche in a kind of the way, say, someone trained in the academy, a Western philosopher might read Nietzsche, or is he just reading Nietzsche and saying, okay, what can I take from this? What makes sense to me from this? And it's not necessarily a one-to-one fidelity with that text. Per se, right?
Well, I wonder. I mean, I think he might be just reading Foucault.
Well, that may be the case too. I mean, that may be the case too. One thing I actually, and I was, maybe you know this. I mean, I know that, he had access to these books in prison. One question that I'm kind of been wondering about, I actually think about asking Havin this, are there any list of the books?
There are lists of the books that he's had access to. It's interesting. Yeah, I think that would be an interesting kind of project in its own right, is to think about like, what are the sources, what is the and really do the intellectual history of Ocalan's massive project,
Right, because I keep thinking like, what Nietzsche did he read, if he did, assuming he didn't just kind of.
My question is, I mean, along those lines is like, because he has, one of my beefs with the way that he frames things is that he's so dismissive of Marx.
Sure.
And I wonder what Marx is he reading? Yeah.
on that account, no, I've wondered that myself, and I mean, I think on that account, my kind of initial guess is because I mentioned this in the chapter. Actually, I quote him from one of his books where he basically says early on in the formation of PKK, they had a very rudimentary understanding of socialism and Marx. They read a few books, and didn't really have much of understanding. He says that he's very open and critical about that period. So I feel like some of what he's speaking to is not unlike Murray Bookchin to some extent. I think what they're both speaking to is
Marxism-Leninism. Marxism-Leninism as a movement.
Right, as a movement, the discourse of a movement, I mean, and I think that's the discourse, in Ocalan's case, the discourse of the movement in Turkey in, the 1970s. Given the kind of disposition of, not just Marxist-Leninists, but other leftist tendencies towards Kurds in Turkey in the 1970s, I can understand how he might get, have some critiques of that, right? So I think there's that. And also I think, again, like when you read him kind of along with Bookchin, you also, who also was, like you say, responding to this Marxist-Leninist movement, right? I think that's part of it, right? But your original kind of question is, what Marx is he reading? Specifically beyond that, that's a good question. I don't know. I'd like to know that.
I mean, I think related, it's a really interesting issue to watch the way in which the different volumes are shaped, and it's almost like you can see the people who are influencing him at the time he's writing it, and it kind of changes over time. So there's a period in which Bookchin seems to be at the time when he's really articulating democratic confederalism as an agenda, and he starts thinking about some of these issues. You can really see the urbanization without cities. You can see the ecology of freedom behind it. And then you see in the second volume of the manifesto, you really see the Braudel comes out. In the third volume, then it starts looking like he starts talking in the sociology of freedom. He starts talking about Gunther Frank a lot, and so you really see. And then there's also the question of like these texts that we get, right? Which I'm reading them only in English to begin with, obviously.
Right. Me too,
and there is this massive amount of material that is coming out at certain point in the last several years there hasn't been anything coming out, but there was a period of time in which lots of stuff was coming out, and
Yeah.
then it gets edited and turned into this thing, which is
Right.
this manifesto that then we read, and there's just a lot of interesting kind of intellectual work to be done to like
Oh, yes.
understand like how we get these products, which are these volumes, you
Sure.
know.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah, I think that's
yeah.
fascinating as well. I mean, that's an excellent point. I don't read Turkish. I probably never will. Sadly,
Yeah.
at 40 years old, I doubt I'll.
I hear you. I hear you.
So to some extent, we're reading a translation. And if you think about it, Ocalan himself are reading translations when
Yeah.
he was working with this work, right?
Yeah, of course.
These sources. So, you have that aspect of it. But yeah, I think, I mean, for me, Ocalan, not being an academic, not being a professional, philosopher or historian, he's a curious guy. I mean, that change you're talking about. You see that progression of different authors kind of influencing the different books. I think that's because he's just this really curious mind. When I read his stuff, it feels like he's just grappling and grasping for truth, for knowledge, for information, and then trying to make it make sense from where he is.
Right. I think he's a synthesizer. He's like trying to get what he can from the different texts that that somehow he's getting his hands on, and then he's always reformulating how he thinks about the deep history, how he thinks about how it's related to the kind of comes back to almost the programmatic questions of what democratic confederalism can be, and he's always he's transforming all the time.
Yeah,
his articulations are always different,
And I would say, that's not. I mean, you can look at other, revolutionary thinkers who weren't academics. Not Marxists, but like the Black Panthers, right? If you read some of their texts, well, they're doing a very similar. They're drawing from Mao. They're drawing from Marxist-Leninism. They're drawing from other movements in the Black freedom struggle. And that as well. So, I mean, I guess part of it is, again, they're not the intellectual questions they find important, but it's also a question of the revolution and struggle, and how do we make this work for that? How do we bring this knowledge to bear on that? How do we bring what we know of that to this knowledge? And I think that's what I, kind of the constant, I guess, joy of reading Ocalan is the fact that you really don't know, what's going to happen next in some ways, because he's so curious. He's just this curious mind. He's trying to figure it out. I mean,
certainly.
There was go ahead.
Well, on this theme of the struggle, being engaged in this struggle, and the struggle, but the way that he articulates the struggle for self-determination. I mean, there's one thinker that comes to mind, as a central figure when we think of in the anti-colonial and post-colonial tradition, that I never have seen him cite, but I think would be an interesting and fruitful dialogue, would be with Frantz Fanon.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think I don't know why. I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe Fanon wasn't translated in Turkish in the 70s. Maybe it wasn't a thing. But no, absolutely. I mean, I felt that myself. And again, looking at some of the decolonial thinkers in the MC school, they kind of genealogically cite Fanon as this kind of key figure for them. So yeah, absolutely. But I don't know. I mean,
well, that would be, that's why I kind of threw that out there for you, because if you're thinking about this whole question of putting Ocalan into dialogue with the broader movement to decolonize thought, to decolonize. But I think the way in which Ocalan is different from these guys in some respects is that precisely that it's very much, even though it's linked to political movements, and you very much see it has links to both the indigenous movement in Latin America and also the Zapatista movement, which was also interestingly related to the indigenous movement.
Yes.
But first and foremost, these guys are academics and intellectuals, and whereas Ocalan is first and foremost a revolutionary leader.
Right.
At the same time that he has a broad intellectual agenda, and I think Fanon is an interesting character precisely because Fanon, immerses himself in the struggle.
Yes.
So I think that would be a really interesting kind of way to engage in that dialogue.
It would, especially, I think to highlight, how Fanon, he was very critical of the kind of independence, intellectuals and independence parties. He was very, you read Wretched of the Earth, he has some pretty biting commentary on like these political parties. He's very, he kind of never wavers from this idea that, the population and popular movements can kind of find some sort of freedom and independence. But yeah, he's pretty critical of what he sees.
And then as you point out, Ocalan himself has all this self-criticism with respect to the PKK. So, which is an interesting thing in its own right. But yeah, certainly putting Ocalan's self-criticism in relationship to Fanon's chapters on the pitfall of national consciousness, for example.
Sure.
But also Ocalan's project of reading into the deep past and the way in which Fanon builds on and also critiques the negritude movement,
Absolutely.
I think all that, it would be really interesting terrain intellectually. So I'm happy to hear that you're working on this kind of intellectual project.
Not so much. Fanon, in relation to the discourse of the kind of MC group, the decolonial guys in Latin America, I'm kind of working in that, trying to figure some of that out and kind of work in this kind of dialogue with Ocalan on that note.
I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see where where it goes. I'm kind of in the middle of this right now, and it's fun. It's really.
So you're taking this up as part of your academic work, then? It's becoming a kind of academic? It's becoming an academic interest for you, or is this something you're doing on the side?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I think it's, I'm trying to, right now, I'm trying, with this particular thing I'm working on now, I'm really just kind of writing it, and will it end up being,
not sure how it's going to
end up being, yeah. So
that's the best way to work. That's the best way to work.
I'm trying to, will it be an academic article, a peer-reviewed piece somewhere, or will it be, a rad pamphlet or something? I don't know at this point.
Yeah, that's cool. So what is your academic specialty?
Well, I wrote my my PhD around the Anarchist Movement in New Orleans. So my training is my training is anthropology. That was kind of, anthropology and geography, basically.
Yeah.
I had I was in a weird situation at Georgia. I had kind of two main advisors that kind of split the chair of the committee, and then I had the committee. And, so one was kind of this cool, you may know Nick Hanen, kind of Marxist geographer.
The name is familiar, yeah.
Yeah, so Nick was kind of the Marxist geographer that was the chair, and then I had a pretty conservative anthropologist, I guess, on the other side. And it was interesting. But so that's kind of where I come out of, this kind of geography, anthropology.
Of the anarchist movement and with a focus on the anarchist movement in New Orleans, huh?
Well, what happened was, in anthropology, and one reason I like anthropology is because of the methodology of ethnography, right? We go there we go there, we talk to people, we live with people, we try to understand,
Yeah, of course.
From on the ground. And so I wanted to do, well, part of the PhD program at Georgia was to you have to do some sort of ethnographic field work. And I was interested in anarchism and social movements, and I was like, hey, I had experience in New Orleans working with Common Ground, which was kind of a collective relief organization that was post-Katrina.
Post-Katrina, that's what I was.
Yeah. This was post-Katrina, and so I did my master's thesis on that group,
on mutual aid groups in post-Katrina New Orleans. That's great.
Basically, yeah. And so I knew there was a scene in New Orleans, and so I wanted to kind of go back and pick up that a little bit more. So I went and did the field work there, and that's kind of that was kind of my focus. Then pretty much right after we graduated, we moved here, and then just kind of got wrapped up in the institutional level of teaching and that kind of stuff. And but initially the idea was I'm going to kind of keep working around social movements, particularly with anarchism. It's kind of a centerpiece of that. But now, kind of on a couple of fronts, I guess Kurdistan has kind of taken over.
Well, the Kurdish movement is an interesting movement to study in the diaspora. And in fact, I mean, part of your relationship, you obviously have some sort of organic relationship with the movement already. And it's an interesting space because it's this diasporic space, but it also has attracted a lot of the kind of anarchistoid, anarchish-ish sentiment on the British left.
Absolutely.
And with the Plan C, for example, being very interested in Rojava and other groups. But also in its own right, I think that the organization of the Kurdish movement in the diaspora, as you said, like you became interested in part because you saw this demonstration and their ability to mobilize at the European level. Despite lots of repression, I think is an interesting thing.
The adaptability of the Kurdish movement, I mean, it's incredible in some ways. I mean, the fact that I remember, a few years ago, you may remember the large and widespread hunger strikes, right? That were happening in Europe, across Europe, in Kurdistan itself. So you have that, right? So you have this kind of very classic form of you might call civil disobedience or nonviolent resistance. Then simultaneously in northern Syria, in Rojava, you have the Kurdish movement, the same movement, mobilizing, militantly against ISIS, against, various other jihadists, and so on. So, I mean, the flexibility of the movement, where on the one hand, it can facilitate, again, these very classic, moves to, hunger strikes, various forms of disruption, and then also militant, action.
Oh yeah,
it's impressive in that way. It's
and also just in thinking in terms of the geographic spaces over which it manages to operate as one movement. And it's a pan-national movement, but also it's somehow in the way that Ocalan has rearticulated self-determination, and opens itself up to people like you and I somehow come in the orbit of the movement. People like Estella being operating in the orbit of the movement. So it being a kind of transnational internationalist movement. Certainly the women's movement is very much lined into kind of internationalist tendencies as well. So it becomes part of the sort of the vanguard of internationalism in the 21st century. Is very interesting,
I mean, I think.
Well, I guess the language of vanguard might be something.
Probably not the best, but. But no, I know what you're saying. I mean, absolutely. It's at the forefront, I think, articulating some of these.
Let's take back the language of vanguard from those Leninists.
Well, they might have an art issue with that as well, you know. But no, I think I think you're absolutely right. Though it's the geographic scale of it, the diversity and potential diversity of drawing people into its orbit. I mean, and that's kind of one of the things that I in the chapter in the book, tried to speak to. I think one of the just incredibly fascinating statements that Ocalan makes, and I think I quoted in that chapter, is where he's trying to describe the nation, and he talks about the nation. And at one point, he kind of says, and this is coming mainly from the pamphlet, Democratic Nation, he kind of says, well, the nation, it's not dependent on even having the same language. All right. It's not dependent on having the same, political structures for everyone. Right. And he goes on and kind of goes on with with this articulation. And, I'm kind of reading that, and I'm thinking, well, basically, in a way, what he's describing, or a way we can read this, is this kind of this political willed formation. He's saying, look, if you want to be part of this community that we're calling a nation, then, you can be, and maybe there's ways, there's some things you'll have to do. You have to agree to a certain, cooperation with others, a certain kind of interculturality with others and things like that. But ultimately, the nation doesn't have to be reductive. And I think that's just, boom, like profound kind of reevaluation, reconceptualization of what nation and nationalism means.
And what self-determination means. I think
sure, right, exactly.
I see it in a way as it's a coming full circle where self-determination is rearticulated through this movement which rose up as a national liberation movement, and it becomes something that looks like radical democracy, direct radical democracy, women's emancipation, ecological sustainability, multilingual, multi-ethnic accommodation. So it ends up looking like radical democracy.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So
and that's what the movement says. In the context of Turkey, one of the things that you hear very often, and in Syria as well, is very often, they say, the goal is to democratize society.
Yeah.
And what that means in the different contexts can vary, of course, but still, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's radical democracy
and militant linked to the whole question of self-defense, and that I think is where the movement is controversial in the era of the war on terror, obviously. So
I got a thing on the screen here. Says meeting has been upgraded to host now include.
They were going to kick us off there.
Okay.
Dealing through Zoom. I don't know. Zoom is problematic in some way.
I mean, I think that's the issue. You mentioned the militancy, the willingness to kind of take up arms to defend themselves. As someone who has this background and kind of knowledge of the anarchist movement, libertarian left movement, libertarian socialism, and so on, I mean, self-defense has always been a part of that. And consequently, and I think it's definitely true today with the Kurdish movement, that does unfortunately has the tendency to alienate liberals. So
it not only alienates liberals, it can get the coercive state apparatus on you, and that's the Kurdish movement has been at the center of the criminalization of dissent in Europe. If we think about a lot of that war on terror apparatus going back to the 1980s in Germany, moving forward, the Kurdish movement has been criminalized. So I think it's I think it's really important to point out that self-defense is one of the pillars of what the movement stands for, but also it's important to understand how that is actually crucial for the alternative, for constructing an alternative to capitalism, but also it brings down the weight of the state.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and it's one thing that I think it's always been a question for movements that had a self-defense element to them of navigating that, and I think that again, I think that the Kurdish freedom movement is pretty good at it. Even if they were, I think even if the movement completely disarmed, and just said, we're going to take a Gandhian route to, pacifistic route to freedom or something, they would still be brutally criminalized. I mean, in Turkey, without a doubt, and, Syria and Iran and so on, they would still be brutally criminalized. And I think they would in Europe too, because in some ways I think the criminalization ties in with that larger international politic of trying to service these nation states, Turkey, Iran, Syria, and so on. So I agree. I mean, it's something that always has to be thought about and kind of grappled with. How much do you present of that? How much do you not? How do you draw the lines between the militancy and so on? But
I think it's important to situate concretely why the Kurds are at the center of so much geopolitical conflict, and it has to do with where the Kurds are in the world. So we're engaging with the diaspora, but it's a people that are spread across Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, right at the very epicenter of geopolitical fault lines. And so that's part of the reason why the Kurdish movement never attained their nation state, but it's also part of the reason why the movement remains in some respect at the center of so many conflicts, and holds on and manages to kind of inherit this sort of flame of revolutionary resistance. And so I think a conversation about the question of self-defense is not just in the abstract. It has to do with like where the Kurds are in the world.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the relationships, between where they are, say, in the Middle East versus, in Europe and America, and so on. Absolutely.
So, lots of interesting stuff, Patrick. I really am interested in staying in dialogue with you, in particular with respect to see how this next article of yours develops. It's actually something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, is how to put Ocalan into dialogue with a variety of different kind of traditions beyond the kind of Western literature that he's so much in dialogue with, and sort of thinking beyond, trying to help him think beyond some of those parameters.
And I mean, it's kind of funny, we ended up talking about all that, about the kind of that moving on. It's funny, the chapter is kind of about the engagement with the Western literature.
It's true. It's true. Maybe we have to have I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about that now, or?
Well, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, I think but again, I would just say that I think one of the things that I was trying to do in that chapter was to have that or make that dialogue he had more explicit, kind of bring it out more, but not reduce it to that. And I tried to say, yes, he's talking through Marx and not Marx, Nietzsche and
Bookchin and Braudel and Wallerstein,
who I think is who incidentally with Braudel I think is crucial in a lot of ways to understanding his methodology in particular. But anyway, yes, I wanted to talk about those guys and his kind of intellectual relation with them, but kind of show how he, again, this curious mind, this kind of genius curiosity of his kind of pushes him in another direction, right? And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about the idea in the chapter of this notion of political reasonableness,
reasonableness and re-enchantment.
Yeah, right. And I think those things kind of go together, in some ways. It seems somewhat, we talk about reason and then enchantment, that seems somewhat antithetical in ways. But, as I kind of point out in the chapter, I feel like, there's this reduction of reason to rationality that I think has been harmful. I think Ocalan kind of would takes that position as well, where, reasonableness is kind of a different dimension of reason, where it's much more eminently social, it's much more practical, and really it's kind of based around the recognition of kind of relationality. You can be completely rational in some ways and be alone. You can be an ego. The ego is rationality in some ways. But really, to be reasonable, you kind of have to be embedded in society and relationships. And that brings along with it meaning, what Ocalan is very concerned with, evaluation, values, and that sort of thing. And that's kind of what I was trying to, get to around with the chapter, where he engages with these thinkers, but then takes them in a kind of direction that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, he's eclectic, and he kind of comes up with his own way of thinking about it. And he's all over so many of the issues, that the left in general is trying to grapple with, how to think about the relationship between these different forms of hierarchy, and how to, along the lines of what you're saying with respect to like how to integrate the critique of science, the defense of myth, but without, as you say, without the kind of engaging in a kind of irrationalist or magical thinking.
Right.
But nonetheless, a very original synthesis, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I guess the other thing I wanted to kind of say in that chapter was, this is all tied in with his proposals, or more kind of programmatic proposals, for democratic confederalism and the democratic nation, in the sense that, like I say in the chapter, he's not asking people to be good. He's not just saying, hey guys, be better people. He's saying, let's create the structures that can facilitate better sociality, that can facilitate the kind of sociality that's desirable. And, so it's not, I think that, and I think that kind of separates it from a kind of neo-primitivist or something like that approach, where it's just like, well, we just have to kind of will ourselves to be better people, or will ourselves to be more natural, or will ourselves. And he's saying, well, we have to put political effort into it. We actually have to have politics. We have to develop these structures, to facilitate our better, better angels, if you will, and that sort of thing. And that's where I think this idea of political reason comes in. The modern state kind of corresponds, to rationality. In a way, it's
You're reminding me of my background in political theory.
So
with all this discussion about the nature of reason, the critique of instrumental rationality, that comes out in your discussion with both with the discussion of Weber and Adorno, and these sorts of guys. So even though you got this background in anthropology, you seem to be more of a multidisciplinary interests, no?
I range, pretty broad. I mean, in a way,
like Ocalan himself.
I wouldn't go that far.
You don't have millions. You don't have millions hanging on your every word. But.
Yeah, exactly. No, I wouldn't go that far. I have odd interests, and I think that's kind of how I'd say it. I have odd interests that take me into a lot of different kind of directions sometimes.
It's a very interesting chapter. I think it's a very original take on what Ocalan is up to. Insightful in many ways, and I'm really happy to hear that you're writing this follow-up piece that puts him into dialogue with the decolonial turn, so to speak. I
Sure.
think that's a great move.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
I also think that there, in a similar vein, I would encourage, maybe through the figure of Fanon, to think about the dialogue between him and the Black radical tradition. Variety of
And
ways to do that.
that's something, I haven't really. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I've thought about. I wouldn't say I'm working on it now in terms of the Black radical tradition.
No, right. That's why I said I'd encourage you to take a further step, maybe even after this, as ways of opening up spaces for dialogue between what Ocalan is doing and what other traditions of radical thought are doing or have done.
Sure, because it's crucial. I mean, I think and that there's a lot, I think, room for speaking and bringing the Black radical tradition into discussion with the Kurdish freedom movement. I mean, even beyond Ocalan, right? I mean, just from a kind of sociological comparison of those conditions, the conditions of Kurds in Turkey versus the conditions of Black people, say, in the United States.
In America,
that sort of thing. I mean, I think, absolutely, you could speak to that. The Black Panther Party in the 1970s, the PKK.
Their 10-point program is not that different from democratic confederalism.
In a lot of ways. I mean, again, I think they, they're absolutely. I mean, good, complete agreement. On that point,
anyhow, lots of things we could talk about. It's a good conversation. Let's take this to be the beginning, hopefully. Please send me the draft of what of this paper when you finish it, and I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at the chapter in the book. It's one of the it's a really powerful book with lots of important thinkers in it. But
fantastic book, without a doubt.
But I think that your chapter is definitely one of the highlights of the book. So it's
that's saying a lot, because I mean, look, as I like to say, I'm just a humble anthropologist. I'm just a humble anthropologist. And we've got in this book, David Graeber, Antonio Negri, Wallerstein, Andre Grubashik, Holloway, so on and so on and so on, right?
Definitely.
I'm not even sure how I ended up in the book, honestly. Like, I was like, what? Wait a minute, what?
It was destiny. It was destiny.
Yeah, I guess so. I honestly, I was looking, I was reading over it earlier today, and I was like looking at some of the other contributors, and I was like, what am I doing?
Man, crazy. You've been catapulted. That's how I feel about being in that book too. Catapulted into history.
Exactly.
All right. Well, like I say, it's been a pleasure, and let's hope that this is the beginning of a fruitful dialogue.
Man, absolutely. It's been fantastic, and I'll definitely keep in touch with you about the kind of progress of this thing I'm working on. So
Great. All right. Well, we'll be in touch.
Yes, man. Yep.
Peace.